Let's get scratching.
Whenever I'm in a conversation about unique or good art styles and aesthetics in video games, almost always, over 90% of the time, someone brings up the Sega Dreamcast classic, Jet Set Radio. This right here, perhaps more than any video game in history, has made it clear how far a good musical and visual identity can take you. Don't get me wrong, I actually love the gameplay and scoring system of Jet Set Radio. In fact, I planned on doing one run for this video and ended up getting every achievement on Steam instead. But when you get down to it, the original Jet Set Radio's gameplay alone would not make the series stick with as many people as it has without the modern hip-hop music and Y2K cel-shaded art style. Think about it like this. Jet Set Radio consists of only 2 games, both of which released over 2 decades ago, one of which isn't legally playable on modern hardware, that second one didn't sell too well, and they're so different that most people, including myself, typically only really love one of the two, and yet, Jet Set Radio is one of Sega's most recognizable IPs of all time. Every big Sega crossover has Jet Set Radio levels, Beat as a playable character, Gum as well sometimes, and if a game in a different series has some kind of alt skin, Beat is usually one of them. Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania. Every non-Monkey Ball character you can play as is from something relevant. Yes. Sonic and Tails from Sonic, Kiryu Yakuza from Yakuza, Morgana from Persona, Hello Kitty, and yet here's Beat as a playable character. Someone who hadn't had a game in 19 years. Jet Set Radio, the idea, has transcended the original 2 Sega published games. Hell, the art style. There's a trend in art right now to replicate early 2000s pop art, and it doesn't take long to find something Jet Set Radio looking when you look up Y2K art. Which is partially because Jet Set Radio is such a quintessential amalgamation of what we associate with Y2K in the Japanese consumer products, sports, and musical counterculture youth scenes. And holy fuck, is that music part important. I don't think there's any way to properly convey how big of an impact Jet Set Radio's soundtrack had on video game OSTs, online music producers, and the people that listen to it. Thanks to everyone, not you, switching to CDs, this is when games started to experiment with licensed music. Sega themselves doing this the year prior, with Crazy Taxi having the uber popular punk rock bands Offspring and Bad Religion contributing a few songs each. And in opposition, JSR mainly got underground unknown artists like David Soul and Guitar Vader that both contributed a lot of songs to both, furthering their exposure. Plus, they had some more popular names like members of the Beastie Boys under their non-BB acts, Jurassic 5, and somehow fucking Rob Zombie. These were artists trying to make music for the radio, not video games, which, when played by the in-game DJ Professor K, gave the sense that this was a real DJ spinning records for a real set of rebellious adolescents. And when it comes to rebellion in the music, we can't skip talking about Hideki Naganuma. Sega had some original music produced for the game, and while I'd say every song by each composer in the original Jet Set Radio and Future are somewhere between good and absolute banger, more in the absolute banger, there's no way we can downplay Hideki Naganuma's importance to the identity of Jet Set Radio. His use of obscure samples added to the delinquent nature by not conforming to what's expected of typical beat boop video game music. Even something as seemingly minor as having fades between songs that sounded like a turntable added to this immersion. Playing a stage of Jet Set Radio allowed you to experience Professor K's weird, mangled musical expression. Jet Set Radio used the counterculture of late 90s, early 2000s Japanese music, art, and consumerism to create a counterculture video game. Cartoony anime characters with minimal story, arcade structure, wacky music, modern setting, everything mainstream games were not rushing towards on PlayStation. And you can argue that Jet Set Radio pushed the identity Sega was always marketing themselves as since the Genesis went up against Nintendo. The alternative. And that's why its audience resonated with JSR so well. But at the end of the day, there are only 2 games that are over 20 years old, both of which differing from each other drastically. Even myself, I absolutely love and adore Jet Set Radio, while I just like Future. And Future was a very Japanese game released on the OG Xbox First System, an underperforming game box that aimed itself towards Americans with Western-centric games. So Future, a niche Japanese game, did not sell that well, and Sega, even now when they've revived a lot of their dormant IPs, hasn't made a new Jet Set Radio ever since then. However, like I said, the identity of Jet Set Radio has lived on. The original game is still playable on Steam for less than $10. As of recently, you can play Future on an Xbox emulator with only minor hiccups. And there are many games that have taken inspiration to some extent from Jet Set Radio. Perhaps most notable are the recent releases of games attempting to emulate Jet Set Radio, I guess, half sale. We've seen a few games lately, such as Neon Tales and Hover, the Revolt of Gamers, that advertise themselves as Jet Set Radio-like games in the same way as Shovel Knight is to retro NES games, but nothing that felt like a follow-up to Jet Set Radio. And again, how would you do that? Without the IP itself, it's hard to follow up both of the Jet Set Radio games, as they're too different from even each other. And the art style itself is also hard to replicate while still making it your own, which is likely why Hover and Neon Tales ended up so different from Jet Set Radio. They wanted to be their own thing, which is perfectly fine. But it did mess with people's expectations since early Hover promo material claimed itself a Jet Set Radio follow-up type game, and they got Hideki Naganuma to compose the main theme. Because of that, Jet Set fans have still been yearning for a new game in a similar vein, and finally comes Team Reptile to bring us Lethal League Blaze, a 2D fighting/tennis game mixture with sound and graphics reminiscent of Jet Set Radio. Technically, it wasn't Team Reptile's first game ever, but it was the one to put them on the map, especially in the eyes of Jet Set Radio fans. So it wasn't too much of a shock that a year and a half later, they dropped a teaser trailer for Bomb Rush Cyberfunk. It didn't show much, but it had cel-shaded graphics, skating, graffiti, urban environments, and Naganuma music crammed into 15 seconds. For me, that's all I needed to know. I'm buying it day one, which certainly took a while to come. I'm gonna skip the rest of the marketing since it's really not that important, but that first trailer was July 22nd, 2020, and the release date was August 18th, 2023, which for an indie game that was made during COVID, yeah, that makes sense. Since August 18th was one day after my birthday, I figured that was a nice gift to myself. And the moment it came out, I prepared myself, installed the game, told a friend who also bought it, and got to doing some other stuff first. I already knew I was gonna make a video, and I definitely could not start right at that moment. That short little Mega Man video I did last month wasn't done yet. I felt like I should replay Jet Set Radio 1 first, and after those two things, I played a few hours of Bomb Rush to realize that it's closer to Future, which I had not played in, let's say, closer to 2 decades than 1. Future was only on classic Xbox, and until recently, original Xbox emulation sucked complete dookie, well now it's just 3/4 dookie, so it's not like I had a chance to revisit it until recently. So I tested Xbox emulation to eventually get Future running, replayed all of that so I can properly make some comparisons here today, and then finally got back to Cyberfunk on roughly August 24th. So by then I at least knew I couldn't make this a release window type video and didn't rush myself. And I'm glad I did that, because Cyberfunk is absolutely the most in-your-face Jet Set Radio successor game on the market, so I think it's fair game for me to make these comparisons. And now before even starting Bomb Rush, I had a moment of ascension. As soon as I pressed start, I was greeted with what has already made it into my top 10 menu themes. Like, no joke, I spent over 3 minutes fiddling around just to listen to the music. There's not even many options, all I really did was change the graphics and sound settings, but stayed after just to vibe. You even get some cool DJ sound effects when navigating, so I started trying to match it to the music. Well, I do have fun on that menu, making a video where I poorly fake being a DJ doesn't pay the bills or get bitches, so I eventually hit start. Opening up in a police station, we get to control a detainee named Foe, a blonde, pretty boy wearing the same clothes as the masked man from all the marketing, so we already know that he's the protagonist. We don't know why he's locked up, but Bomb Rush makes it clear that this is similar to Jet Set Radio, an anti-establishment video game, so I sympathize with Foe based on pure pig hatred. So as a sympathetic criminal, our first objective/tutorial is to break out of prison with our new buddy Trice. And as the tutorial went on, I started to get a feel for Foe as a protagonist, Trice as the new homie, and felt relieved once I got outside. Jet Set Radio normally started you outdoors in a sandbox area so you can play around a bit, so beginning in a closed environment with Bomb Rush didn't give me a whole lot of room to test my stuff out. Thankfully, Foe can do that now that he's made it out. And I assume he'll get the helmet from the trailers after he officially joins Trice's gang called the Bomb Rush Crew. foe didn't make it out of that unscathed. The main villain, DJ Cyber, well, if you didn't have me in the background you saw, he cut foe's fucking head off. Thankfully, the punks have cybered funkily in this era, so Trice and his only other gang partner, Bell, got him a new cyber head as well as a flippy phone that looks a lot like my first phone when I was a kid. I was taken aback a bit at first, but Trice said that a lot of people go the full 9 yards with Mecha Head Vader replacement things, which certainly eased my mind. But obviously, new head means new person, and as a new guy with a new brain, they rename him Red, and the game actually begins with 2 goals in mind. Red's goal to figure out who he actually was, since it's not like Foe and Trice knew each other that long, and the Bomb Rush crew's goal of going all city, which means taking over every turf of New Amsterdam. A pretty cool setup that leads into a mostly standard story. Speaking of, I know some people like when I do the story recap and analysis parts, like with Kingdom Hearts, Gunvolt, the obscure videos I do here and there, but today I'm gonna make this a halfway spoiler-free review. I like the story for what it is, but I don't have enough to say which warrants spoiling the cheap indie game by an upstart company that deserves your money. And as a cheesy in-your-face game, the themes are also cheesy and beaten into your head. Because of that, I'm not gonna bring up the big twists or anything in the final chapter besides the location, which you can walk into during chapter 2 if you wanted. New Amsterdam has 5 different territories, all currently taken by their own gang that you've got to take down, which as you can guess means you've got a typical chapter-based progression where chapter 1 is territory 1, chapter 2 is territory 2, and so on until you've gone all city. To start out, let's go over the basic game mechanics. Bomb Rush's environments, at their core, are meant to facilitate replayable playgrounds to test your abilities, so it makes sense to start with those abilities. Stepping back, I've seen a lot of people finally try out the original Jet Set Radio and describe its controls as clunky, and you know, if that's how you feel playing it, then that's how you feel. I'm not gonna change your thoughts on it. However, I'd rather say it's on the side of realism, besides the fucking moon jump. If you compare the turns, physics, and poses in Jet Set Radio, it's not that far from actual inline skating, which, like any sport, is difficult. Jet Set Radio's cool traversal isn't given to you, you get it after you've mastered its controls and physics. That's not at all what Bomb Rush is going for. Of any skating game I've played, which basically means Jet Set Radio and the old Tony Hawk entries, Bomb Rush grants the player the most control over their character, though obviously it still controls similar to every other skating game. Starting with just how the character controls on the ground, the physics follow what you'd expect. Uphill causes you to lose momentum quickly, and downhill picks it up quickly. Not a confusing idea if you live anywhere with a hill, and there's thankfully an even ratio of upward slopes to downward slopes to maintain balance. Now in the original Jet Set Radio, that essentially meant that to keep a long combo going, you'd want to start from the highest point possible. Getting back up was reliant on the level design, and when you fell down, you'd get a harsh punishment. For Jet Set Radio's arcade-like design, that worked out. You're looking for perfection in small levels. Jet Set Radio Future then changed it to where you could speed up by doing simple button press tricks on rails and slow down by holding back. And if you don't have a rail, you can use 10 graffitis to super boost, which made going uphill a lot less scary since you can just find a rail or use the boost. These mechanics fit with the focus Future had of level traversal, which Bomb Rush shares and improves upon. So first and most obvious difference you'll notice is with the resource management. In Jet Set Radio and Future, the funny graffiti games, you needed to find cans of graffiti to graffiti shit. Again, worked great for the arcade structure, though in Future's case, it could get problematic. Future required you to graffiti every taggable surface in a majority of the campaign's first half. And due to the increased map sizes from JSR, there's a few parts where you need to make your way to a hard to reach area to then realize you don't have enough graffiti to finish an art piece. It doesn't happen often since Future throws a lot of cans at you, but whenever it does happen, it's usually at the very worst possible moment, like in the sewers or the skyscraper district, which both take a while to retrace your steps. And it got even easier to use those cans up since the boost costed 10 cans and a majority of characters hold 30 or less cans, meaning that you'll use 1/3 of them with a single use, making said boost more of an emergency use than a core gameplay mechanic. The graffiti use in Future isn't necessarily something I despise, just groaned at a few times, which is why it's a pleasant surprise to me that BRC gave it a facelift that I probably would have not thought of if I made the game myself. Now you have infinite graffiti, not a single string attached to how much you use. Walk up to any graffiti spot and not only can you spray it as soon as you have control of your character, you'll be rewarded with about half of a boost meter, because they overhauled the boost as well. Similar to a majority of games with a nitro or boost function, you have a meter for it. Press the boost button and you go for it using an equal amount to how long you held the button, which also makes it into a core game mechanic rather than an emergency option like in Future. Additionally, the meter isn't solely reliant on from graffiti either. Sure, tagging graffiti fills it up fastest, but you can also get some meter for doing tricks and upping your score multiplier that we'll come back to later. Since you're playing a trick-heavy skating game, that means you'll rack your meter back up fast, so you only run out if you poorly plan out your routes. And then the other two big traversal additions are the double jump and the slide/manual that are pretty self-explanatory and are easier to talk about with other subjects, so let's move on. Once you leave the home turf, you get to enter Versum Hill, the borough owned by our first rival gang, the Franks. For anyone that's played Jet Set Radio Future, you should feel a bit comfy with the first segment here. One road with grind rails on each side and a partisan you can grind in the center. A clear enough visual similarity to Future's Dogonzaka Street, while having enough differences to signify a separate identity. And in a skating game, this is definitely a good start to copy. Basic ass downhill area lets you get more comfy with the physics of going up and downhill, and at this point, you know just about nothing about the combo system, so if you're like me, you may try to jump between these rails to get a combo going, to find that it's seemingly impossible. Which puzzled me at the time, since most skating games start you out with your entire kit, so I figured the stage would either change later, which it does by removing this wall, or I'm stupid. The latter was the correct answer to my question. So for the time being, I continued on. And unlike Dogonzaka Street from Future, which continued as a loop like many of Future's stages, Versum Hill feeds you into a large open playground closer to a flatter Tony Hawk area. And it's here when you have a better chance to try the new core mechanics such as the slide, manual, and double jump through your confrontation with the Franks. And let's start by talking about that confrontation because Bomb Rush fixes one of Jet Set's biggest flaws here. In the original JSR, it worked where you began each borough of Shibuya with a stage where you graffiti an area within a time limit. Get 2 of those done per borough, and you had a rival gang battle where you chased 3 members of a rival gang and sprayed them 10 times each. In my opinion, those chases are the weakest parts of Jet Set Radio. On paper, they fit the idea of do tricks and spray stuff with graffiti, so I get why the developers put it in the game, but in practice, they got annoying. In the actual stages, you'd have a nice rhythm where you go as fast and cool as possible down carefully planned routes to reach a graffiti mark, where you'd then make a full stop to graffiti. A fun, addictive, and replayable system that grants the player tons of freedom. You have a huge number of ways to deal with each stage depending on how you're comfy. That wasn't the case with the gang fights. Each of the 3 gang members had an unchanging loop they followed, and you had to stay at the exact perfect rate behind them to tag their backs with graffiti. If you catch up to them and keep the right speed, you can usually finish them off quickly, or you'd get disoriented by the graffiti button sharing the camera fix button and lose them. Even then, they were super generous with the ranks on these. Like, even as a little kid, I never had an issue with getting a jet rank here, and I doubt I played them that well, when even today, I'd spend longer than I'd think warrants a jet rank to earn one anyways. Future then kept these, and thankfully they're less frequent, but the one against the noise tanks on a roller coaster is a total waiting game that occasionally doesn't fucking function properly. Anyways, Bomb Rush replaces these with rival confrontations that match the core mechanics of the game closer than what Jet Set Radio offered. How it works is that once you're introduced to each of the rival gangs, you need to go around and tag graffiti walls until you've achieved a high enough reputation threshold. Once you do, you'll unlock a challenge against one of the members of the current rival gang. These challenges consist of either copying what the rival just did, getting a higher score than the other dude in a set amount of time, or racing against the other guy to reach a certain score point. Now focusing the fight on the game's main strength of fun, trick-centric traversal rather than chase the dude. And what's coolest about these is how the follow me type missions teach you the more intricate game mechanics. For example, during the first one against the Franks, you'll see a Frank member keep a combo going despite hitting the floor by doing a wheelie. And immediately after I got a little text from Trice, my old Tony Hawk rental memories came flooding into me as the menu let me know that you can use a manual in Bomb Rush. A maneuver similar to a wheelie where you have just a few, typically the back wheels, on the ground. In the Tony Hawk games and Bomb Rush, it lets you continue a combo even if you're not on a rail, wall, or whatever else. Now to be transparent, I haven't played a Tony Hawk game since like middle school, and maybe I'll turn it on for footage after writing, but because of that I won't make too close of comparisons today. Main difference is that I recall Pro Skater having a more engaged balance system during a manual, while in Bomb Rush your manual is time and physics based, meaning if this meter runs out, the manual stops, ending your combo. Additionally, you're allowed to unequip your gear at the press of a button and do a slide instead of a manual. We'll come back to this stuff later. So why copy what the Frank does by using the manual, and every spot from earlier where I couldn't get a combo suddenly made sense to me. After that, on the next Frank, I learned that leaning into where you turn on a grind both adds to your combo multiplier and speeds you up. Going forward, pretty much every time you copy someone, you learn something new about your moves that inspires you to go back and test what you missed. And it's not like you unlocked them here, you have everything from the start. Bomb Rush just never told you that you could use these abilities, which also means that upon any replays, you can get anything done way faster. Or a curious player might test every button combo before you're told and have a lead, which is already established I wasn't smart enough for. Moving back to structure, after you finish off the Frank Smooks, the Bomb Rush crew meet up with their leader, the Flesh Prince, who also gave Red his cyborg head. Theoretically, the Bling Bling Boy wannabe should have the answers to Red's history, but after Red sees that his robo head is a dime a dozen, they focus instead on beating the Franks for territory and maybe getting info on DJ Cyber and Foe's head instead. At the end of each chapter, you've got a final whole team showdown with the rival gang where all of your crew goes up against the rival crew to see who can get the most points. In my opinion, it's a really neat way to test your knowledge of the score system and map layouts, which, yeah, I guess now I should actually go in depth with those two things. If we look down at the score text, you'll see two things: the score itself and the score multiplier. As you perform tricks, keep grinding, and just not touch the floor, your base score goes up. Well, when you lean into turns during a grind and run on billboards, you gain score multipliers. Then after you hit the floor without manualing or the manual gauge runs out, the score is multiplied by your multiplier to receive your final score. Your goal at all times should be making sure that this meter stays above 0 by doing pretty much anything. Grinding, wall running, holding a handstand on top of a palm tree, just about everything keeps you inside of your combo and refills that meter. The only basic tricks that don't refill it are your normal tricks and boosting. However, an advanced trick that I'm not even sure I learned until post-game is that if you press the boost and trick button at the same time while performing a manual, you can expend a significant portion of boost meter to do a funky trick that refills your manual. Someone in-game might have told me that somewhere, I just never really needed it, and my post-game realization made me feel kinda cool, so I guess it works out. At its core, this is a very easy score system to pick up, and honestly, it's not too hard to master either. Main thing you really need to keep a combo going is an in-depth knowledge of each stage. While the turns and billboards get you points no matter how many times you hit them, you only get a score multiplier once per combo. So if you've already made a turn on this grind rail since the combo started, you're not gonna get a second multiplier next time you turn there, which in turn brings back a Jet Set Radio 1 aspect I was scared wouldn't be here: routing your trip. So in Jet Set Radio 1, the reason to plan out your route was to deal with the cops. Depending on how many walls you already tagged with graffiti, decided which types of lost swine were after you, so you had to weigh out which walls were the hardest to tag when the cops are on your tail, so you could start with those. In the latter missions, which required you to go across entire boroughs of Tokyo-to, you have a surplus of options that I find fun to attempt. It's one of my favorite aspects of Jet Set Radio 1, and it's why I just like Future instead of love it. Future didn't have that aspect since most levels were linear, gave infinite time, and police don't attack you while you tag walls. Since Bomb Rush is following Future more, I kinda expected that to be the case, but that's not entirely true. Ignoring police since they're not always around, your main enemy when pulling off big combos is your own skill. You need to figure out what spots to start at, where you want to end, and where to spend the most time, because there's absolutely some spots that are far better than others. Since your multiplier has more weight than your score, you normally want to start by maximizing your multipliers. For an example, in Chapter 4 you visit a pyramid-shaped oil rig. Like a normal pyramid, it's small up top and large at the very bottom. Said top also houses a lot of corners to start out your combo, and it's, to my knowledge, impossible to go from bottom to top without passing a loading zone that breaks your combo, so it makes sense to begin the combo at the top of the pyramid and end it at the bottom. And during your downward trip, you want to figure out which spots to prioritize. For example, you need to hit this super loop around the middle. As a curvy shaped round object in a super polygony game, it counts a shit ton of spots on it as turns. It's easy to nab over 20 multipliers, and if you're fancy, fancy, you can do even more than that. And right next to that is even more turns high up in the sky, giving you quite the risk-reward factor if you want those multipliers. Getting these multipliers is so fucking fun. I loved figuring out what way to go about it, and even every time you make a turn on one of these rails, the little boost of speed it gives you just puts a big whoa in my mind. For another example, the final map Matan has a bit of a weird trick here. One of the last rooms in the map can get you a shit ton of multipliers just by going in a circle, like a very easy 50. However, it's separated by 2 floors, and when you're at the bottom floor, it's kinda tricky to get out, because it requires you to go up an inline skate's one weakness, stairs. When going for full map combos, stairs are gonna be your biggest enemy. If you wanna go upstairs and not break your combo, you need to have your gear turned off, middle of a slide, and use your little meter trick to get through a normal set of them. So stairs this large? Yeah, you shouldn't attempt this haphazardly. Unless you've become a stair champ, your combo needs to end here. But because of that, I already have an end in mind when I start my combo, making it a tad bit easier to plan out my route. And a cool side effect of this is that the end of my route is when I'm getting the most score multipliers, giving me the most emotions of yeah! And what makes all that routing more engaging is the control. As I said before, the original Jet Set Radio games were on the heavier, realistic side. If you start heading in a direction a skater can't get out of, you're stuck in that direction. That almost never happens in Bomb Rush. By skating game standards, these physics are mega precise, and the jumping mechanics is what makes it even tighter. Instead of jumping up like a normie leg user, the characters in Cyberfunk actually use a booster pack to get off the ground, which gives a story reason for why the characters have so much midair control, the boost, and a double jump. This double jump carries so much fucking weight on its back. Pretty much the entire stage design relies on this. Obviously, like most double jumps, the main use is to get a little height or redirect your aerial movement. Redirecting yourself gets super important. While Bomb Rush grants the most control of aerial movement and even ground movement of any skating game I've played, there's still skate-based momentum, which can lead to overshooting jumps here and there. The original Jet Set Radio and Tony Hawk worked around that with large platforms and smaller environments so that you didn't need the most exact precision. Only time you need to be super exact is if you were aiming for the highest scores, and at that point it makes sense for the difficulty to go up. So this double jump allows for more precise platforming easily, and thus more options for how to design each map. Again, looking back to the middle portion of the pyramid, it's filled with tiny rails that would be an absolute nightmare to stay on without the double jump. And I guess I should add this, if you were looking for a hard game, Bomb Rush probably isn't gonna give you that. Now, personally, I'm not the biggest stooge when it comes to difficulty. I usually like my games in the upper medium difficulty like Castlevania or Ninja Gaiden, and occasionally I'll go to an easier game to relax like Knights, a score-focused arcade type game where the difficulty is self-motivated. Bomb Rush, especially after beating the main campaign, is something I'll probably play when I'm in that Knights type mood. An arcade-like experience I can turn on for a little bit and try to beat my previous higher score. And I like having those in my collection. I feel like a lot of people, especially content creators such as myself, will look at a single player games as one and done deals and not really touch them again. When I'm given an experience like this, it at least keeps me from uninstalling it from my computer. Now, there are a few more intricacies to go over with Bomb Rush's skating mechanics, but in terms of why I loved it, I think I got those points down. Though for other things people will probably point out, there is a character customization type mechanic, but it's pretty much all cosmetic, so not much to go over. For the main story, you just have Belle, Trice, and Red for over half of it. Though similar to Jet Set Radio and Future, you can eventually unlock pretty much every character with a real model, including rival gang members and main villains. Every character has 4 outfits, you can customize their skates a little bit, and plays exactly the same, with the only slight difference being the gear you pick. In Bomb Rush, you actually have the choice between a skateboard, BMX bike, and the inline skates, but there's very little change between them. I believe the length and speed of your manual changes, but it's to minor enough degrees where I didn't find it affected my abilities much. Really, you should just pick the one you think looks coolest. Your main incentive to change gears are the secrets that only one of each can unlock. Skates break glass floors, BMX bikes open BMX doors, and skateboards make fire hydrants taller? Okay. For these little secrets, I'm not entirely sure that it was needed. I'm guessing they implemented it to motivate players to test the other gear sets instead of sticking to the skates, because that's certainly what I gravitated towards when you market this as a Jet Set Radio looking game. However, it ends up just leading to a bit of backtracking. I reach the gear-specific thing, realize I don't have the right gear, go to the dance floor, which you use to change characters, and then switch to someone who has that gear equipped. Which is what you'll need to do mid-level, since the only way to change an individual character's equipment is going back to the home base. Is it annoying? Yeah. Would I say it harms the overall experience? Not really. I recall one of each per map, and I think only one BMX door was ever mandatory for story progression, so it doesn't bother me too much. And by default, Trice has the BMX bike, Belle had the skates, and Red has a skateboard equipped, so I kept it like that for the main campaign. Typically defaulting to Belle, because if it's a Jet Set Radio throwback, I wanted to feel more like JSR with skates, and then changed her to the goth girl colors because don't fucking judge me. So I spent like half of this video talking about score systems and controls. That's cool, but when it comes to a Jet Set Radio type game, that's really the cherry on top. There's tons of games out there that have fun score mechanics and tricks to them. In fact, there's a remake of Pro Skater 1 and 2 out on modern platforms right now, so why should you pick Bomb Rush over those? Well, it's for the one thing that no one's ever replicated perfectly yet, Jet Set Radio's style. Like I said back at the start, JSR's identity had a lot of staying power. It's still one of Sega's most recognizable IPs, and I'm glad to say that Bomb Rush nails emulating that with a perfect blend of its own identity as well. And honestly, for me, the first sign of that was the file size. Bomb Rush, before any potential patches they might have added, was under 2 gigabytes. For a modern 3D game, that's fucking insane. In fact, it's only half a gig larger than Jet Set Radio's Steam release. Now, there's a lot to go over in terms of aesthetics, so let's start with general graphics and world design. Jet Set Radio's main purpose was to portray late 90s Japanese counterculture in game form, which involved bright colors, personalized outfits, cel shading, Tokyo-looking levels, anime, and over-the-top everything. Team Reptile replicated almost all of those, except them being a European team in the Netherlands makes replicating late 90s Japanese things a bit more difficult, so I'm glad they planned something else. Cyberpunk definitely evokes Y2K era artwork, especially Japanese things like Tamagotchi, Slap Happy Rhythm Busters, DDR, and obviously Jet Set Radio, but I think what sets it apart is how Cyberpunk evokes a feeling of a projected future. There's many elements clearly taken from the present, but at its core, they're trying a future that's evocative of both what would be straight up cool by today's standards and what people expected in the past. Think of a Logan's Run or Back to the Future type of idea. You can grind on rails on the ceiling, but there's still less than futuristic things in the game like flip phones being used for your menus, which I'm fine with because flip phones are fucking cool. And that coolness is seen best with the architecture. Whether it's the tall buildings connecting to each other in unrealistic ways, the twisting pipes at the oil rig, tons of marketing everywhere, the tall multiplex mall, which actually isn't too out there size-wise in Asian countries. That was a recent lesson for me. Cyberpunk's architecture feels like something made by a comic artist like Jack Kirby or Mobius rather than a real architect, and I think that helps to distinguish it from the modern day sensibilities of architecture. Buildings connect to the world in a more abstract way than what's on the street today. Speaking of the street today, that's again where Cyberpunk deviates. Not as in it doesn't portray the counterculture, but in that it portrays a different one. One that's modern and noticeably more Western, because like I said, the team is in the Netherlands. However, I'm hesitant to say that the world of Cyberpunk overall is very Eurocentric, or at the very least, it's mainly taking from urban hip-hop culture, which by roots would mean American influence. Though that is simplifying more than I think we should. Bomb Rush's future setting is clearly trying to take from a mixture of representations, especially with the music, graffiti, fashion, and dancing. Now, let's start with the fashion, because I don't have a whole lot to say there. I'm the jeans and a t-shirt guy most days. Everyone has at least one big noticeable piece to their character, like Red Cyborg head and Risei's big ol' Kanye jacket. And personally, I love the entire cast design. It's a certain mix of funky and goofy, with some dudes wearing normal street stuff like Red, others in outfits you'd expect on Eurovision, and DJ Cyber who's just absolutely fucking sick. Like a reverse funky Darth Vader with the all-white outfit and mask, plus some vinyl CDs sticking out of him. Most of the cast is very exaggerated, though maybe they could have gone further on some others. Postgame has a few characters you can unlock that don't have real stories, and I'm not feeling like their designs and personalities make up for the lack of it. Coil and Rave specifically could have used something extra. Personally, I think a bit more voice acting could have done that job pretty easily, which to a certain extent can go for the whole game as well. Officer Onishima and DJ Professor K put so much life into Jet Set Radio 1 that made up for the rest of the cast's minimal voice acting. Maybe, and I'm just spitballing here, having Red or Trice speaking over an intercom or DJ Cyber Cyber over his radio station would have gone a long way with that. DJ Cyber, as a DJ with a deep voice, even fits that character type of Professor K, but he'd be more serious. Maybe he'd give threats like Onishima and be a mix of both characters. However, I am understanding of why that's not here. As impressive as this is for an indie game, this is an indie game and voice acting can get expensive, so I'm guessing professional voice acting was never even considered in the budget. On the topic of characters, let's talk dance. I've mentioned this a few times in the past, but I was actually a professional level or was training to be a professional level dancer for over half my life. Due to a few injuries and American dance jobs paying like shit, I don't do that anymore, but hey, I still got a BA in this stuff, so most of y'all can't argue with things I say. In terms of implementing the dances, mechanically, it's not anything crazy. There's no big dancing minigame, and I think that's fine. It likely would have broken the pace of the skating. Instead, dance is used as a world-building and communicative aspect, particularly with each gang having one of these 6 dance styles. As such, you, the player, starts out with one dance, and then you get the other 5 as you defeat rival gangs. And this adds a lot of charm to each gang and sets them apart a bit better, as though each borough and each gang has their own brand of funky dancing and they won't change to any other. Then once they join the Bomb Rush crew / you unlock them as playable characters, they learn the other dance styles from their new gang mates, using their dance as a form of solidarity. And honestly, it got me to try a few too. There's some I already knew like popping and hip hop, but others I wasn't overly familiar with. Like I knew they existed, but hadn't given them a shot. And for anyone who might want to give it a try after playing the game, then yeah, it's not too tough for some of them. All 6 of the dances you can do on the overworld are easier steps, so if you want to begin, that's probably what you want to do. Though I'll admit, due to how most street dance carries over and alters terminology and steps from other dance styles, even the stuff I didn't know immediately wasn't far from what I was trained in, so maybe my opinion isn't the best there. Honestly, I might check any lessons for house dance in my area. It's got a nice blend of stuff I do and don't know that it might be a good entry for me to lose some of the weight I've put on since I quit dancing. Anyway, the communal aspect of the dancing is also portrayed with how switching characters requires dancing at a dance pad, and even recruiting most optional crew members needs you to dance a specific step, which I think are both great ways to portray the connective aspect of dance. Even if you have no good way to start a conversation with someone, you might have a non-verbal way to talk to them. And I like that. It means the dancing overall is purely here in a non-intrusive world-building manner. Alright, so now moving on to the 2 big things, graffiti and music. If there's anything that comparing yourself to Jet Set Radio means you need to nail, it's these 2 qualities. And does it nail both of these? Absolutely. So let's start with the music. One of the important aspects of Jet Set Radio's music was how it felt like a real radio that the Jet Setters listened to. A collaboration not because everyone jumped in the room to work together, but because those are the songs chosen to play that day on the radio. It's why the song list was filled with genres that were popular in the late 90s like nu metal, electronica, and alt-rock in JSR, and then Future added in more rap, techno, and whatever the fuck you consider Latch Brothers. Jet Set Radio was representative of the now, and Future had a noise that sounded just a tiny bit more futuristic than what we currently had, which it partially achieved by remixing already existent songs from JSR 1's soundtrack. Bomb Rush somehow nails both having music indicative of modern era, and that feeling as though it came from a fake future. First of all, the music in Bomb Rush is a lot more sound cloudy, if you catch my drift. In the story, DJ Cyber is playing all this music on his internet radio station, and it gives me more of a personal playlist vibe, complete with the cool-ass fades from Jet Set Radio. When it comes to song selection, Bomb Rush is majority electronic, though with a heavier funky dance focus than Jet Set Radio. There's a couple of funk artists here that I had actually heard before on Bandcamp or SoundCloud, and I kinda love that. Which I don't mean a, oh, they're pretty funky kind of funk, I mean a straight up Zapp and Roger-esque early 80s type funk. We also have some other genres here that would have not been too hot in the 90s, like a dubsteppy type beat that pops up during intense moments, and even a few lo-fi hip-hop beats to relax and study to. I vibed out to In the Pocket for So Long, and Refuse by Swami Sound, the theme of a character named Solace, gave me an early web feeling with the slow beat and electronic voice, like something you'd hear in a Windows XP tutorial or a Newgrounds game. The entire soundtrack does a great job of separating itself from JSR through genres that weren't really popular back then and has a great variety of musical artists as well. Some I knew and some I didn't, so I'm gonna give the unknown guys a listen soon. And that feeling is, again, comparable to when I hear a good song on the radio, or more likely today on Spotify or SoundCloud. I go home to look up more of their work and or quickly type them in at a stoplight because, let's be real, I'm not gonna remember in 5 hours. Now with graffiti, as a mechanic, it's doing something totally different from before. In both JSR games, it worked where you had a few different graffiti sizes and you'd pick one to take with you at all times. In the original Jet Set Radio, that was pretty cool because with the arcade structure, you could replay a stage with a different tag later. It didn't get you some eye-opening new experience, but it was a kinda neat to see something else. Once you unlocked enough of them, you might find one that really spoke to you the most, which is cool on its own, but the downside is that you were putting the exact same tag at every spot, which wouldn't be the case with real graffiti. I mean, real graffiti artists also don't finish in 10 seconds, but we still want a fun game here. Now in the original JSR, graffiti was the main piece tied to your score. How well you perform the QTE decided your point bonus, while Bomb Rush, your score comes mainly from the trick and combo system I talked about earlier. And you'd think maybe the change in focus would cause them to implement something lackluster like Futures graffiti, but actually we get a unique method instead. Once you go up to a taggable wall, you're given a few dots you need to connect, with the number dependent on the size of the graffiti. Depending on how you connect those dots decides which design you paint, meaning that every design you've unlocked or found in these stages is always with you. And if you forgot how to do it, you can check your flip phone for the combination. And if you're not going to have the graffiti count towards score, then I think this is a cool way to get around that. Lets you use the graffiti mechanic as a moment for artistic freedom. And with how many tags are in the game, you'll definitely be able to do that. There's over 70 different tags from over 30 artists with unique styles. Styles with hard edges on the text, anime characters, hip-hop dudes, bubble letters, Ren and Stimpy-ass edgy demons. Personally, some of my favorites were the ones with animals on them, such as the angry headphone cat and the dancing bear. It's a lot of fun using these, and yet again, a shockingly big collaborative effort for an independent game. Many of the artists actually got theirs in the game after it was already marketed, which goes to show how much people were clamoring for a new, urban, unique skating game. It's yet another example of how people can come together for something they love. So I'm not the biggest achievement hunter in the world, and that's why I don't talk about them often in my videos, but with Bomb Rush, I really feel like this is how you can get the fullest out of it. Mainly, the achievements that ask you to achieve a certain score threshold, and the ones that want you to tag every wall. So by the time you finish an area casually, you more likely than not missed a few spots. Actually, I think all of them had at least one tag that is impossible until you start the final chapter. And occasionally those blocked off areas have rails that yield high combo multipliers, meaning that both of the big boy achievements are locked behind areas you have not yet discovered, giving you a reason to both see the new place and reevaluate how you interacted with the stage after you've gotten better with later ones. All the while maybe imagining the new route for said achievement, finding and choosing which songs to listen to in your phone's MP3 player, have fun with any new graffiti you find mid-stage but hadn't drawn yet, and maybe play as new characters you unlocked. And as I said earlier, the combo system is not hard, so achieving these achievements is like free dopamine. Total funky fun with cool music, popping graphics that brought me back to my childhood, and a fresh feeling that despite its echoing of the past, could only be done today. Like, my Steam game time is a little fucked on here because I would leave the game on when I stopped to eat on recording days, but I feel confident in saying that roughly 1/3 of this time was spent on trying for higher scores. Like, honestly, at this point, I feel confident in saying that Bomb Rush is gonna stay in my rotation of score attack quick fun like Knights, Crazy Taxi, Panzer Dragoon, Gunvolt, and even the original Jet Set Radio. Those types of games are a certain genre I adore so much, and anytime someone makes one that sticks out from others, I love it. Going in, I expected Bomb Rush to be Jet Set 3, and this unique approach to scoring, plus controls even easier to catch on to than Future, has made it a totally unique experience for me. And with rumors of a real Jet Set Radio 3 seeming more possible than ever, I'm curious how Sega's going to compete with this. Either way, I'm excited to see what Team Reptile has next, whether it's a follow-up to Bomb Rush or a totally unique idea.